You know, it's funny how much dogs lick themselves because they don't actually ever get themselves clean. What the hell is up with that? Sickos.
Hey everybody, how's it going? So it's been a couple weeks and I guess I gotta do the update on what I've been working on. So at the end of the last video, I talked about how I was gonna set the deadline for getting a trailer done for the end of this month. So I've been working on a trailer. I guess here's a little sneak preview of some of the stuff I've been doing there, but it's still very rough draft at the moment. So the main thing that I've been doing has been trying to like detail or re-detail out old areas that I'm going to be using in the trailer. So if I want those areas to look better, now's the best time to do that. Even if it's just like confined to one screen's worth of what you're going to see in the trailer, that okay, I've improved what that looks like so that it looks better. So I've been doing that. I'm about to get started on doing a little bit of kind of more controls work, so I can do like debug controls because I want to be able to like move the camera around and stuff while I'm playing the game or while I'm recording, so that I can kind of direct that a little bit more live. So I did like a rough draft of the trailer already that was sort of done without doing any of those additional tools, kind of to just get an idea of how that might work as far as a trailer and what things I might need to improve. So I showed that to some people so I could get a little bit of feedback. But I do still feel like it would be good to add in some of those tools. Like I do have the ability to make adjustments to the framing and zoom the camera in and out, but I don't have kind of more fluid controls. Those are really controls that I have set up for doing screenshots, so they don't really look good in motion. If I change the zoom level, it looks really abrupt and gross. So I just need to add some extra things there so that I can get more dynamic looking shots and not just have to rely on framing so much or editing, because the fact is that the game doesn't have a lot of action that goes on. Say you're doing a trailer for a Diablo type game or something. The camera can be generally not that doing that interesting stuff. Of course, most of the time you would be doing that, but in any case, there'll be a lot of animations of fighting and spells going off and explosions and things that would look interesting. So you wouldn't have to worry so much about how do you make it interesting or tell the story purely with the camera. So anyway, that's a little bit rambling on that, but that's what I'm working on right now. But I did actually come up with a little bit of a topic of the week for this week, because I like to do topics of the week rather than just leaving it as me talking about what I did on the game, because I feel like I've probably said this before, but I feel like if I just talk about what I did on the game, then there's no reason to ever watch this video later. You don't get anything out of it other than just a snapshot of what I was doing. And, I might come back to some of these subjects later if I ever do go back into doing serious video essays. But in any case, so topic of the week this week is difficulty. Specifically, I think difficulty is such a broad topic that it really helps to narrow this down. So I'm just going to talk about difficulty, specifically how I think about it when it comes to Taiji itself. That might apply a bit more broadly to puzzle games in general, but it really just depends on the type of puzzle game you're making. So there's kind of two main things that I think about with the difficulty in Taiji. One of those is the difficulty of grasping new concepts, and this is just because figuring out the rules for puzzles is such a big part of the game that it kind of requires its own thought about how difficult that is or how difficult you might want that to be. And then the other aspect is the difficulty of actually just solving, an individual puzzle. So, and that difficulty could come from some of that first category, but sometimes it might just be purely a logic thing, or figuring out what the specifics of this puzzle are in terms of how the mechanics are actually expressing themselves through that individual puzzle. So I think the first one's more interesting to talk about because it's the more unique thing to Taiji. This concept of like non-verbally teaching the player the mechanics. I mean, teaching is kind of the wrong word, right? Because it's like the actual challenge of the game a lot of times is in guessing or inducing in some way what the rules are for those particular mechanics. And so much of the design of the game has been centered around this kind of limitation, you could say, that the mechanics have to be something that I don't have to use words to explain to you. There's lots of different, if you looked at pen and paper puzzle games, there's lots of different mechanics there that take a whole paragraph to explain. There may be something that's like a very simple rule, but then there's this kind of paragraph of additional rules on top of that. If you've ever seen the YouTube channel Cracking the Cryptic, which I'd advise that you watch if you haven't, but you'll see a lot of that type of thing there, where there's, let's say a Sudoku puzzle that has admittedly rules that already have to be explained because they're complex enough, but then there'll be something else layered on top of that. Like, well, you need to add in like a diagonal requirement that the diagonals are, 1 through 9 as well. Those types of mechanics can't really work in Taiji because there's no way to non-verbally communicate that, and if you just expect the player to guess it, then it's going to be a really frustrating prospect. And so that kind of ties into the whole, flow thing, the flow state thing that game company's games have kind of been built around, and this idea of like balancing the difficulty between frustration and boredom, that there's kind of a middle channel there. That does apply specifically with Taiji, and I think with puzzle games more broadly, but it can be a bit weirder in terms of the way you think about it, because it's not so much, difficulty is always weird, pretty much any video game, whether it's an action video game or a puzzle video game, and I probably shouldn't jump outside of my wheelhouse of knowledge too much to just talk about like how Dark Souls is difficult, or how the original Metroid for the NES is difficult, because those are all very different realms of difficulty. But suffice to say, I think for games where you have to kind of deduce or induce the mechanics in some way rather than being explained to you verbally, it's important to keep in mind that the mechanics themselves need to be chosen around the concept that they can be easily discovered. I guess this kind of does fit into the like user interface concept of discoverability. Is it like likely that a player is going to do something that would cause them to learn more about that mechanic? And then the second aspect of that would just be in terms of like designing puzzles or situations in a game more broadly that are expressly intended to make it very likely that the player is going to encounter some aspect of that mechanic that you want to highlight. So that's kind of how I'll tend to design sequences in there. But difficulty specifically comes for me in just the speed at which I introduce those concepts. Am I introducing one thing at a time, or are there multiple things that are being introduced at once? And then how much I feel like I've primed the player to think about things in a specific way. So sometimes I might actually prime the player to think about a mechanic in the wrong way, like they do a set of puzzles, and it's not exactly the wrong way, but I've set it up in such a way that they start seeing some kind of pattern in the design of the puzzle or whatever, and that causes them to think about the mechanic a certain way, and then I'll hit them with some kind of puzzle that is specifically designed to break out of that mold. And that could be a difficult puzzle, but it also, especially when I'm introducing the core concept of a set of puzzles, the way that mechanic works, that specific hitting you with something that breaks the pattern very strongly can make, in my two aspects of difficulty, that individual panel might be difficult, but the fact that it challenged you might make your understanding of what this mechanic is go a lot more smoothly, because you hit a challenge that was specifically designed to break away some kind of possible interpretation that you might have of that. So anyway, I don't think this is quite fitting into where I thought it would on terms of the topic of difficulty, because there's kind of like one other layer on top of that that I'd like to talk about, which is just the question of, how difficult should you make a game? And of course, my scare quotes there on that imply that I sort of feel like it just depends on what kind of game you want to make. If you want to make a game that's really difficult, then make it as difficult as you can. But, difficulty is something that's balanced depending on like what the audience for the game that you're making is. And some of that is like presumed audience, in that you think this type of person is going to be drawn to your game, so maybe you'll target the difficulty that way. And then it can also just be, the type of person that you're imagining that you want to make the game for. And since I gravitate more towards thinking about things that way, I go more towards designing for myself or someone who might think about things similarly to me, which might make the game really difficult for most people, and certainly would fall counter to kind of the prevailing industry standard that you make the game as easy as possible or as accessible as possible to as many people. I'm not even going to go into the accessibility thing. I wrote a whole devlog post about this. I'll put a link in the description for that if you want to read about some of my thoughts on accessibility more broadly, but difficulty is a small subset of that doesn't quite run into as many of the weird challenges that you get with accessibility and all that. Anyway, so all that's my philosophy, and I feel like it does kind of run counter to the prevailing wisdom of how you should design for difficulty. It's just the thing that makes me happiest. It's like I'm trying to make the game that if somebody else was making a game, I would want them to make it like this, right? Because there's certain things that I really enjoy in games, and a lot of those things tend to get polished off in this pursuit of making the game maybe not easy, but, easy enough to most people. It's like I like to have something that challenges me to think and really requires me to, think outside the box, even if that's difficult. But I like doing that type of thinking, and I like having that type of challenge. So, I think the success of, like, the Zachtronic games, for instance, is a pretty strong indicator that there's a lot of people who like having difficult puzzle games that are very niche and wouldn't appeal to most people. So, in any case, hopefully you also like difficult puzzle games that don't really hold your hand, but are fair and logical about how the puzzles actually work. And maybe you feel like the market is not serving you exactly in this regard and is more catered to providing games that more people will like. And in that case, maybe you'll like this game that I'm making. Oops, I just bonked the microphone, so hopefully that didn't cause any problems. In any case, this has been a bit rambly, and I didn't have a strong point other than I'll just come back around to my standpoint of really difficulty is a matter of personal taste and how you balance these kind of two forces of, I guess, the market force of making the game as appealing to as many people as possible with the kind of art force of, making the type of game that I really would have liked to played. That's just a personal, it has to do with how you define yourself as a designer, I guess. Anyway, Thanks again for watching, and I'll be back in another 2 weeks. Till then, subscribe to the channel if you're not, because you might want to keep up with these when they come out. Like the video, because apparently that matters. As far as stuff getting circulated on YouTube, it's probably not going to happen for this channel unless the game does really well and people go back and want to watch this stuff later. If you're doing that, hello. What else to say? Wishlist the game on Steam. There's a link in the description for that. You can follow updates. I thought there was an animal behind me, but it was just a tree. You can follow updates on the devlog, the written devlog. That's taiji-game.com. You can follow updates on Twitter, @Taiji Game. You can see screenshots twice a week right now on Instagram. So that's Mondays and Fridays. I'll put up a new screenshot there of the game. And hopefully soon I will have this trailer out, and then you can share that with people as like a quick way to kind of maybe pique their interest in the game. Anyway, so keep your eyes peeled for that whenever that comes along. And until then, I will see you all around. Have a good one, everybody. Bye-bye.